Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about every single card on the Commander ban list and whether or not it really deserves to be banned. You might notice that my thoughts are a little more all over the place on this one because I didn't really write a script for this episode. Since this is a special 100 subscriber celebration episode, I figured I'd just kind of do it off the cuff. Alrighty, so for this tier list, we're going to start with the cards that definitely most deserve to be banned and then work our way all the way down to the cards that probably should be unbanned. And then at the end, I'll talk about a couple cards that aren't banned right now, but are maybe in the conversation.
That's it, you're banned.
We ban you! Get out of the store!
I will not get out of my store!
Get out! You are banned!
You're banned!
You're
You're
banned!
banned! You're banned! I'm banned!
I called the first tier just literal Power 9, because all of these cards are in the Power 9 and should definitely be banned in every format except for Vintage. For those who don't know, the Power 9 are Black Lotus, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, Time Twister, and all 5 Moxes. And all of these cards are banned in Commander, and definitely should be, except for Time Twister, which just isn't banned for some reason. But we'll talk about that more later. I don't think anyone, first of all, even owns these cards, so no one really wants them to be unbanned in the first place. But even if Black Lotus was a widely acceptable card, I don't think anyone would want it to be legal. Same goes for all the Moxes, they're just too good, they go in every single deck. Ancestral Recall is a blue Harmonize at instant speed for 1 mana, which is, I know blue's good, but that's just a little too good. And Time Walk is just a 2-mana Time Warp, and Time Warp is already a ridiculously good card, so we don't need it to be 2 mana. All these cards just should be banned, end of discussion. Our next tier is just called OP Needs Nerf. These are cards that are pretty much universally seen as way too good, and I don't think anyone's really going to consider unbanning these anytime soon. Starting off, we have Time Vault, a 2-mana artifact that enters tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step, and you can skip a turn to untap it, but you can also tap it to take an extra turn. Now this card might have been okay when it was printed, I don't know, but with all the things that can untap artifacts nowadays, this is just super easy to take infinite turns with. Here are some examples of cards that can easily untap this artifact that I will put on the screen with the magic of editing. Ooh, look at all these. Alright, next up we have Lutri the Spell Chaser. This one should obviously be banned because it's a companion that could go in every single red-blue commander deck unless it's running like Shadowborn Apostles for some reason. And it's not that Lutri is that good, like Lutri could literally be a 5-mana 1/1 and I still don't think it should be banned because you can put it in every deck, so you just have to buy one to put in every red-blue deck because like why wouldn't you do it? It's just better to do it. So it's not so much that it's too good, it just kind of clashes with the rules of the format, I guess. Trade Secrets is another example of a card that just doesn't really work in Commander. It lets you draw 4 cards and an opponent draws 2 cards, but that opponent can choose to repeat that as many times as he wants. So if you play this card, there's a decent chance that 2 of the players at the table are going to draw every single card in their deck and the other 2 players are just going to lose. And Karakas is another example of a card that's just way too good for Commander specifically because it's a legendary land that can just bounce legendary creatures. In a format where everyone's deck is built around a legendary creature, this is kinda ridiculous. Next up we have Falling Star. I actually thought that maybe this card should be legal for a bit because it's not actually that good. Falling Star is a 3-mana red sorcery that you have to flip onto the table from a height of at least 1 foot, and it deals 3 damage to each creature it lands on, and you tap all the creatures that it deals damage to. It also says if Falling Star doesn't turn completely over at least once during the flip, it doesn't do anything.
Well, I'm convinced, folks, that's pretty much the stupidest thing I've ever heard!
No, this is the stupidest thing you've ever heard.
Now this card was obviously banned because it's dumb, and they didn't want cards that you had to throw to be legal, but when you think about it, it's not actually that good. Like, best case scenario, it's going to be 3 mana, deal 3 damage to like 2 creatures maybe, because it's, it'd be really hard to somehow throw it onto the table and make it touch like 5 creatures. That just wouldn't really be possible. So I almost wanted to say this one should be unbanned, but there are a couple things that changed my mind. First of all, this card just doesn't work online in any way whatsoever, which is kind of a problem. Secondly, a lot of times people use dice and stuff to represent tokens, and that would probably cause a lot of arguments. Like if someone has a d20 set on 20 to represent 20 tokens, and you throw the Falling Star and it touches the dice, does that just kill all of the tokens? Like, that's just kind of weird. But what definitely convinced me that this card should definitely stay banned is the fact that if you make a copy of it, it's really unclear what happens. In Magic, there's no rule as to what you can use to represent a token, So I'm assuming there's also no rule as to what you can use to represent a copy of a sorcery that you have to throw. If any normal person copied their falling star, they would probably just throw the original card to represent the copy, but I think technically according to the rules you could probably throw anything. Like you could just pick up another table and throw it onto the first table and say, oh, this table represents the copy of my falling star and it deals 3 damage to all of your creatures, which is really dumb. Now obviously you shouldn't do this because it's very stupid, but you could technically legally do it, and the only thing stopping you is general human decency. But the fact that something like that is even possible just makes it a little too silly. Alright, next up we have Chaos Orb, which is basically the same thing as Falling Star, only it's an artifact, and after you throw it, it just destroys every permanent that it touches. This card should be banned for all the same reasons as the last one, but also because it's really good. Like, Chaos Orb is 3 mana, destroy anything you can throw this at. Assuming you're super good at throwing, it's basically 3 mana, destroy 2 permanents that are next to each other, which is insane. That's like the best artifact I've ever seen. So yeah, this one's obviously out. Next up, we have Tolarian Academy. If you thought Gaia's Cradle was good, this card makes Gaia's Cradle look like Adventurer's Guildhouse, alright? Like, this card is insane. It looks like kind of the same thing, because this one taps for 1 blue for every artifact, and Gaia's Cradle taps for a green for every creature. But there are a lot of artifacts that are free, and there's also a lot of artifacts that make mana that you can tap the turn you play them. Like, the fastest start you could possibly get to with Gaia's Cradle would be like Memnite, Ornithopter, I don't know what, Shield Sphere, Gaia's Cradle, tap for 3, play a 3-drop. But with Tolarian Academy, you could go Mana Vault into Soul Ring, into Mana Crypt, into tap Tolarian Academy for 3 blue, but you also actually have good artifacts on the board instead of stupid 0 mana creatures that don't do anything. It's just way too good. Next up, we have another busted blue artifact card, Tinker. I think a good comparison to show just how busted Tinker is to compare it to Pattern of Rebirth. Tinker lets you sacrifice an artifact, tutor your deck for any artifact, and put the artifact on the board, whereas Pattern of Rebirth lets you enchant a creature. When that creature dies, you get to tutor for any creature and put that creature onto the board. Now at first glance, these seem kind of like they're at the same power level, but first off, I'd say tutoring for any artifact is probably better than tutoring for any creature. That's kind of arguable, but there are some really good artifacts. Second of all, it's also a lot easier to get a cheap artifact on the board that you want to sacrifice, because like I said, there's a lot of 0 mana artifacts to tap for mana. You could like turn 1 Mana Crypt Island, Tinker the Mana Crypt, Bolas the Citadel, win the game, you know? And also, Pattern of Rebirth is just a lot worse, because someone can kill the creature in response to you playing Pattern of Rebirth, whereas Tinker sacrificing the artifact is part of the cost, so they can't destroy the artifact in response to you playing the Tinker to stop you. And Pattern of Rebirth doesn't automatically kill the creature for you, so at the very least you have to find a way to kill it. So yeah, Tinker is way too good. If it was legal, people would probably play Tinker and Blightsteel Colossus in like every blue deck, just because, you know, if you start the game with a Soul Ring, you get a Blightsteel on turn 2, and that's just not fun. So let's see, there's only a couple cards left in this category. We have Channel. Channel basically just lets you convert life into colorless mana for the rest of your turn. And if you start with 40 life and you play this on turn 2, you can get 39 mana on turn 2, which is too good. Next card. Last up we have Fast Bond. Fast Bond is like Exploration, which is already a super good card, but like infinitely many times. You can just play as many lands as you want on your turn with no limit. You do take damage, but like who cares if you take 1 damage? And yeah, if you run out of lands in your hand, then it's not as good, but if you're playing this in a deck, you probably have a bunch of wheels in it, so you just play all your lands, you play a wheel, draw a bunch more lands, play a bunch more lands, wheel again. Like, this is really good. This is way too good. So that's it for that tier. Our next tier is called a Little Banaynays, which is cards that should be banned a little bit, but I could possibly see someone changing my mind on these ones. Let's start with the commanders. Our first one is Leovold, Emissary of Trust.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
I think this one should stay banned because I'm sure that most of the people who played against Leovold decks when he was legal did not have fun. And getting rid of him just probably was a net positive for the format. But when it comes to banning cards, I feel like fun is kind of a weird reason to ban things. I feel like you should really only ban things if they're too good. And personally, if Leovold was legal, I don't think he would be the best commander available. Like, Urza's probably better, and can also be just as miserable because Urza's usually stacks, which is very, very grindy, just like Leovold. I honestly think the problem was that Leovold was too popular when he came out. So, if unbanning him would mean that only super competitive people would play him, and they would only play them in their super competitive groups, then I feel like that would honestly be fine. But the problem is people are going to play him at casual tables and just make everyone discard their hand and no one's going to have fun. So he should probably stay banned. Next up, we have Gristlebrand, everyone's favorite demon daddy. The problem with Gristlebrand is you start at 40 life, so you can pay up to 35 life theoretically and draw 35 cards as soon as you play him, which is kind of ridiculous. But I'm not sure if he's the best mono black commander. Like, Crick is probably better, right? I think the bigger problem with Gristlebrand is being able to cheat him out. Like, if you could reanimate Gristlebrand, then why would you reanimate any other creature ever? Because he's just the best creature to reanimate by far. So I don't really think he'd be that much of a problem as a commander where you actually have to pay 8 mana to play him, but just being able to cheat him in and stuff probably makes him a little too good. Alright, moving on, we have Rafellos, Llanowar Emissary. This guy just makes too much mana. Like, if you're playing a mono green deck, he just doubles your lands basically for 2. Like, that's ridiculous. And you can untap him with all of these cards that are on the screen right now. Ooh, look at these cards, I can untap him. And like, for 2 mana, like, if he costs 5, then maybe. But 2 is not okay. Alright, and our last legendary creature here is Emrakul, the Eon's Torn, the giant 15 mana Eldrazi that's been ending games of Modern ever since he was printed. This is another one that I don't think would be that bad if he was your commander. Cause like, if you play 15 mana for an Emrakul, you kind of deserve an Emrakul. You know, like, you paid 15 mana, that's a lot of mana. But I think he should stay banned because if Emrakul is legal, then he's just the default choice for the creature to cheat in whenever you have the ability to cheat in a creature. But since he's not legal, now when you put a sneak attack in your deck, you have to actually think about what you want to sneak attack, you know? Whereas if Emrakul was legal, you just play Emrakul every single time. So I feel like not having him makes it a lot more diverse and actually makes it more fun because you get to see a bunch of different giant creatures that do funny giant things. So if it were up to me, I would definitely lean towards the side of keeping him banned. Alrighty, up next we have Flash. I feel like this one should stay banned because according to anybody who was playing CEDH, Flash was just single-handedly ruining the entire format by itself. Because Flash with Protean Hulk is just way too good and makes you win the game for 2 mana whenever you can play it. And I feel like most of the time we shouldn't be banning things strictly based on CEDH, but if there's one card you can ban that nobody in casual even cares about and it just fixes the entirety of CEDH by itself, I feel like that's just worth it. Next up, we have Gifts Ungiven. This one was actually a tough call for me, and I was kind of leaning towards maybe allowing it to be unbanned for a bit, and I'm still not entirely sure if it should be banned strictly on power level because there are probably things that are better than it that are still legal. But what I really don't like about it is that it lets you tutor for 4 cards, and being able to tutor for 4 cards is just going to make all of the times you play it feel exactly the same. I feel like it just gives you way too much consistency for what's supposed to feel like a singleton format. Like, I know an opponent gets to put 2 of the cards in your graveyard, but it doesn't really matter. You know, you're going to be playing this in a deck where you can play cards from your graveyard, so it's just going to be fine. You could play this in like a Kess deck or something and only get instants or sorceries. So I don't think it's too good, it's just too uncommandery. It's too tutory, it's just too much tutoring for 1 card. Next up we have Upheaval. This card is bonkers. It's like Cyclonic Rift, but it also hits you, but it also hits lands. And that makes it really, really, really good. If you're seeing this card for the first time, you might be thinking, well, this is symmetrical, like it's bad for you too, so it's not even that good. But the problem is you play Upheaval, but before it resolves, you float like 5 mana and then play a Gilded Lotus, if people still play Gilded Lotus, after the Upheaval, and now you're just ahead by 3 mana, and nobody else has anything, which is ridiculous. Like, people already don't like Worldfire, because Worldfire restarts the game, but at least Worldfire puts you to 1, so the game's gonna end soon. Upheaval doesn't. Like, Worldfire was banned because the rules committee was afraid of the interaction where you play Worldfire, you float mana, and then you play your commander. Upheaval's like the same thing, but cheaper, And since it doesn't get rid of your hand, you don't even need a commander. You just float mana and play whatever you want, and then you have stuff and no one else has any stuff, and then you just win. Like, Cyclonic Rift already makes people salty, but compared to Cyclonic Rift, Upheaval would be like a surstrummy prosciutto sandwich that was left in the Great Salt Lake for like a month. And I don't think people are gonna put up with that much salt, so let's keep this one banned. The last 3 cards all kind of do the same thing, so I'm just going to group them together and talk about them at the same time. We have Limited Resources, Sundering Titan, and Balance. And all of these cards just mess with lands too much. Limited Resources makes everyone sack down to 5 lands when it ETBs, and it says if there are at least 10 lands on the board, then you can't play more. Now if it was just the first part, it should still probably be banned, but I would maybe be okay with it if all it did was make everyone sack down to 5 lands when you play it. But the problem is if you play this on like turn 1, then that means 2 players are going to get up to 3 lands, the other 2 players are going to get up to 2 lands, and then no one can play lands anymore. So there are 2 players who are stuck at 2 lands just because they couldn't stop your 1-drop. Like that's a little too much. Sundering Titan just kills too many lands. Like, you play it and it dies and you've killed like 10 lands. And in a 4-player game, you're probably going to have targets for all of them. All of the colors are usually represented, so this would just be the best blink target by far, maybe even the best artifact creature. It is a cool card, but in 2-player it's kind of balanced out by the fact that you probably have to end up destroying some of your own lands, because the other person's not going to have a plains, a swamp, a forest, an island, and a mountain. But in 4-player, it's a little too much. Now, Balance does require a lot of setup, but the ceiling on Balance is super high. Balance basically says everyone has to discard cards, sacrifice lands, and sacrifice creatures down to whoever has the fewest of each of those things. So if you're playing a deck that doesn't have any creatures in it, maybe you're playing just a big Super Friends deck, you get empty-handed, and then you just don't have lands for some reason, then you play Balance, and everyone else has to get rid of all the cards in their hand, sacrifice all their creatures, and sacrifice all of their lands. I know that's a lot of setup, but even if you don't get the perfect case, Balance is really, really good. Honestly, if this was a couple years ago when White didn't have any good cards, I would maybe say just like give him Balance and that'll probably be good enough. But now that White's actually kind of getting some good commander cards, we should probably keep Balance banned. Alright, the next category is just meh. These cards are like the lukewarm cup of water of the ban list. Like, they could be banned, they could be unbanned, I really don't care either way. It's really a coin flip on what you're feeling that day. I don't think any of them would make the format better, but I don't think they would really make it that much worse, so it's kind of just whatever you want. And to top off this list, we have the most recent controversial banning, Golos Tireless Pilgrim. I don't think Golos needed to be banned. I think the only question with Golos is just whether or not we want there to be a default commander. If you're playing a deck and there isn't an obvious choice of what commander you should use, then you should just use Golos. Like, he's just the best choice for any commander deck that isn't very specifically built around the commander for some reason. Which, you know, is kind of a bad thing because it means there's going to be a lot of Golos decks, and there were a lot of Golos decks. He was the most popular deck for a reason. But it's not that big of a problem. Personally, I'm a little happy to see a little bit more commander diversity, but it would have been fine. He wasn't that big of a problem, so it could really go either way. Up next, we have Library of Alexandria. This is a colorless land that you can tap to draw a card, but only if you have exactly 7 cards in your hand. This card is very, 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 very good if you're playing 2-player. Like, in a 2-player game, having 1 more card than your opponent can make you win the game. Like, that's just how it works. And having a land that can maybe draw you a bunch of cards is super good. But having to tap the land to draw a card is a real cost. Like, best case scenario, assuming you get everything to work out nicely and you have 7 cards in your hand whenever you need to. If you want to draw 3 cards with this land, you have to tap it 3 times, which means you paid 3 mana to draw 3 cards. Now that would still be better than something like Harmonize, because Harmonize costs you a card to draw 3 cards, so you're only up 2. Whereas the library just still stays as a land, so it doesn't really cost you a card to draw the cards. So, like, don't get me wrong, that is really strong. But, you know, how often do you have exactly 7 cards in your hand? If you draw this in the middle of a game, you probably can't use it unless you already have a bunch of cards, and if you already have 7 cards, then getting an extra one isn't that big of a deal. Also, if this card was legal, then only like 2 people would play it because I'm sure it's at least $1,000 or something. I do think it's super strong, but it's super strong in a way that you can still beat it. You know, drawing a couple extra cards isn't gonna automatically make you lose the game, as opposed to something like Sundering Titan, which could blow up 5 of your lands. So while it's super good, it just doesn't seem as oppressive as the other ones, and I would honestly be fine with it if someone played one against me. Next up, we have another recent banning, Hull Breacher. Now my opinion might be influenced by the fact that I never had a Hull Breacher played against me the entire time it was legal, so maybe I just don't know how bad it was. And yes, this is a ridiculously good card. I'm not saying it's not powerful, it is stupidly powerful. But I don't care if a card is super powerful if I don't run into it that much, and I just never saw this one. Maybe, maybe everyone else was just playing against Hull Breachers all the time, and that's why it had to be banned. But I think about Hull Breacher kind of the same way I think about Stasis. Like, maybe you think Stasis should be banned, but it's not really a problem because no one plays Stasis. Out of all the games of Commander I've ever played, I'm actually the only one who's ever played a Stasis, so maybe I'm just a terrible person. But I don't think we need to ban cards that aren't seeing that much play, so I would be okay with it if they unbanned it, because I expect that I would continue to not play against it, but maybe I'm totally wrong. So if like everyone in your play group was just playing Hull Breacher every single game, then just tell me how wrong I am in the comments. Up next we have Prime Time, the best Titan by far. It's kind of ridiculous to think that this guy is in the same cycle as all the other Titans. Like Frost Titan, Grave Titan, Inferno Titan, Sun Titan, none of them are even close to as good as Primeval Titan. But the question is this creature too good for Commander? And I'm not sure that it is anymore. It is ridiculously good, but like, is it better than Korvold? I don't know, like Korvold's also really good. Now maybe that just means Korvold should be banned, but I'm not gonna say that because all the Korvold players would be mad at me.
It's over.
Not for you.
Now maybe since I don't play Modern, I'm just not giving Primeval Titan the respect it deserves, but at the same time, we have Uro, and Uro's kind of like half a Prime Time. I know that's not, it's not even close because Primeval Titan gets the tutor, blah blah blah, but it's similar, and Uro can be your commander, so that makes it way more consistent because you get to play it every game. Like in a deck built around Primetime, it's obviously going to be stupidly strong, but in your average green deck, I feel like it'd be fine. So I could see this one going either way. Alright, our next card is Recurring Nightmare. This is another one where I feel like when you first look at this card, you're like, that card's not that good, like it's kinda good, but it's not oppressive, it's not ridiculously good. But then you start thinking about it, and there's just a bunch of little things about it that kind of add up that are all just, they all maybe just push it a little bit over the top. So Recurring Nightmare is a 3-mana black enchantment, and it has an ability that says, sacrifice a creature, return Recurring Nightmare to its owner's hand, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. Now, this is really good. It's basically 3 mana, reanimate a creature, but you have to sacrifice a creature to do it, and you can do it as many times as you want. And yeah, you can only do it as a sorcery, but you can just kind of keep doing it. Like, you can just keep playing it over and over. And I think the big thing for me that convinced me that it should be banned is the fact that returning Recurring Nightmare to your hand is part of the cost of the ability. So if you play Recurring Nightmare, there's no way anyone can destroy it before you put it back in your hand, because you can play it, hold priority, and then activate its ability, putting it back in your hand. So the only way to deal with this card is either a counter spell, or in response to someone playing Recurring Nightmare, killing all of their creatures so they can't activate the ability, and then playing a disenchant, which is just not going to happen. So because enchantment removal basically just doesn't work on this enchantment, I think that makes it a little bit too good. But then again, reanimating is already really good. This one's close. This one's very, very close, and I kind of almost want to say we should unban it, but it's a tiny bit too good. It's just a tiny bit too good. Alright, and last up we have two very annoying commanders. We have Braid's Cabal Minion and Arayo Soratami Ascendant. I think for both of these, we're basically only talking about them in terms of playing them as a commander, because if both of these weren't legal as commanders, I don't think anyone would care if you put them in your deck. Braids is basically just a smokestack that always has one counter on it. And so the question is just, should you have smokestack in your command zone? I think no. I don't think you should have smokestack in your command zone. But is it better than Turgid? Also, probably no. Turgid is insane and lets you play like a bunch of cards for free just by having Turgid out. So I don't think Braids is better than that. It's just so much more annoying and slow. At least if someone plays Turgid and steals all your cards, you know, at least they have stuff and they can kill you and the game will be over. But if someone plays Braids and just makes you sack a land every turn, you're just gonna have to sit there and wait, what, like 60 turns for the whole, I guess 63 turns for the whole table to die from commander damage? Oh wait, no, I did the math wrong. 33 turns, excuse me, I'm a math major by the way. So yeah, in my mind, it's a worse Turgid that's 10 times less fun. And I don't think we need that. But I also don't think it's too good, so it's just kind of in the middle. Arayo is another one that seems super unfun if you can make it good, but I have no idea how good it is. And I don't think you can really know how good it would be unless you played against it. Now maybe some of you have played against this card, I'm assuming it was legal at some point. Arayo is one of those weird flip commanders, and to flip it you have to play 4 spells in a turn. And once you flip it, it counters the first spell that everyone else plays each turn. So the important thing is it triggers 1 spell per opponent each turn. So if one person tries to disenchant it, and then another player tries to disenchant it, both of those disenchants will go away. And yeah, disenchant would work, because when it flips it turns into an enchantment, because Kamigawa was strange. Now this ability is really good, but in order to make it work, you have to fill your deck with garbage. So I don't know, like your deck would just be full of like Urza's Baubles and Mishra's Baubles and Jataxian Probes and probably like every 1 mana blue cantrip that exists. I feel like your deck would be kind of bad if you built around this commander, but the commander's still really good, so I don't know. I have no idea how good this would be, and I would have to play against it to really have an accurate idea of whether or not it really deserves to be banned, so this one just has to go mid for me. Alright, now we're on to all of the cards that I think should be unbanned, and there are actually fewer than I thought. There are only 11 cards in these bottom 2 tiers, and I thought there would be like 20, so you know, maybe the rules committee is actually doing a pretty good job. This next tier is our smallest one yet, and I call it the Cheesecake tier. Because like Cheesecake, all of these cards are kinda nice, and if I had the option of having them over not having them, I would probably pick to have them every time. But not having them doesn't really make me sad. It would just be kinda cool. First off, we have Paradox Engine. I don't think this card was too good. It is very good, and if you build around it, you can do some crazy things with it, but if you build around any 5 mana card, you can do some crazy things with it. I played against a lot of decks that had it when it was legal, and I never thought, man, Paradox Engine is just ruining Commander for me, and it needs to go. Especially with the power level of Commanders slowly going up and up over the years, this card's fine now, and it really shouldn't be on the ban list. In the same vein, we have Prophet of Crufix, which I think is a much worse offender. Maybe Prophet was way too good when it was banned a long time ago, but it's not too good now. It does give you a ton of mana if you're playing a deck that only has creatures in it, but people can react to it. It takes a little while for the value to actually get going. And honestly, I think Mana Geyser is probably better. Mana Geyser gives you like 30 mana right away when you play it, whereas Prophet slowly gives you mana over people's turns, people can react to it, they can stop you, and you can only use it to play creatures. I would genuinely be pretty surprised if this card didn't come off the ban list in like the next 5 years or so.
Were you killed?
Sadly, yes. But I lived.
Up next, we have Sway of the Stars. This card does a lot of stuff, but it really doesn't matter what the words are on the card. It's a 10 mana sorcery. Like, how is a 10 mana sorcery banned? Like, Tooth and Nail is a 9 mana sorcery that makes you win the game if you play it, assuming you put a 2 creature card combo in your deck, but there's a ton of those, so just put one in your deck. Sway of the Stars is kind of like a Worldfire that doesn't get rid of people's hands because everyone gets to draw 7. So, you know, you can play it and then float mana and then play something and then maybe hit people, but first of all, everyone else has 7 life, and 7 is a lot more than 1. You can't just kill people right away if they all have 7 life. And secondly, if you're playing Sway of the Stars and floating enough mana to do something else, then you deserve to win the game. Like, I would say you need like at least 5 mana after Sway of the Stars to play something big enough to ensure that you win afterwards. And like, that's fine. 15 mana win the game is fine. If they made a 10 mana sorcery that just said you win the game on it, like, that's kind of the power level we're at, so that's probably okay. Now that, that specific example is kind of dumb, but 10 mana is just so much mana that this has to be fine. The only reason I didn't put it on the very last tier is because I don't think it's that fun? I don't know why, but this card just seems way less fun than Worldfire to me. Something about getting rid of absolutely everything and making someone go to 1 life is just way funnier than this one, which is like a Worldfire that just didn't want to commit to being a full Worldfire. Next up we have Yawgmoth's Bargain. This is a 6 mana enchantment that's basically just the enchantment version of Gristlebrand, only you don't have to know your 7 times tables. And I think this card would be okay. I don't think Yawgmoth's Bargain would see as much play as Necropotence if it was legal. Now I know that Necropotence does have a lot more downside because of all the weird discard things and you're not actually drawing the cards, you're only getting them on your end step. So I know it's a lot worse, but it's also 3 mana. Yawgmoth's Bargain is 6 mana. And there's a big difference between 3 and 6. Like I said, as a math major, I can confirm that 3 and 6 are not the same number. And compare this to Bolas' Citadel, which lets you play the cards for free. I do not think Yawgmoth's Bargain is better than Bolas' Citadel, so it's fine. We can handle this in Commander. This would be an okay card. And our last card in this tier is Sylvan Primordial. Essentially, when this card ETBs, you get to destroy 3 non-creature permanents, and you get to tutor out 3 forests. This card is basically like if Primeval Titan and Sundering Titan got combined into something that was worse than both of its parts, in a way. What makes Primeval Titan busted is that you can tutor for any 2 lands, and getting 3 forests is not nearly as good as getting any 2 lands. And Sundering Titan destroys 10 lands, whereas Sylvan Primordial can only destroy 3. I know it can hit other things, but it's still only 3. And for some reason, this one just doesn't seem as bad to me. It's still really good, but I don't think it's the best card out there. But I will admit that I could be wrong about this one, which is why I didn't quite put it in the bottom tier. Maybe this one does need to be banned, but personally, I don't think anything it does is too ridiculously strong. And finally, our last tier is Can I Haz Please. These are the cards that just should be unbanned. It's objectively true, I'm right. Don't listen to anybody else. First off, we have Worldfire, which is already unbanned, so I was right. We don't really need to talk more about that one. Next up is Biorhythm. Yes, Biorhythm can win you the game if nobody else has any creatures, but that's a big if. And at the end of the day, it's just another 8 mana sorcery. Like, I am not convinced that Biorhythm is better than, like, Amanatu's Augury, or, like, Insurrection. All 3 of these cards are 8 mana sorceries that can win you the game under certain circumstances, and I don't think any of them are that much better than any of the other ones. Biorhythm isn't clearly better than the other 2, so I think it would be fine. Next up is Panoptic Mirror. This one's a 5 mana artifact, and you can pay X mana and tap it to imprint an instant or sorcery with converted mana cost X from your hand, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to just copy one of the instants or sorceries. Now the obvious combo is you play Panoptic Mirror, you exile Time Warp, you play an extra turn, on every upkeep you win the game. But that's not even good. It costs 5 mana to play the mirror, 5 mana to use the ability, and then you have to get to your next upkeep. Cards that say you win the game if you get to your upkeep and nobody deals with this are not good. It is very rare that those permanents ever actually survive until the person's upkeep. If this card was legal, I don't think that many people would play it. I don't even think it's good. These last 3 cards might be a little controversial. First off, we have Iona, Shield of Emeria.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Now, I personally don't think this card got banned on any sort of power level metric. I think it just got banned because people thought it wasn't fun. Which, to be fair, if you play this card and you name red, and one of your opponents has a mono red deck, they're probably not gonna have that much fun. But how often does that actually happen? Iona costs a buttload of mana, and people just don't play monocolored decks very often. Like, yes, Iona is super oppressive in very niche situations, And if your playgroup had a bunch of monocolored decks in it, then maybe it would be too good, but that's a big if. People just don't play monocolor very often. I know this card might make some people salty, but I think it's kind of funny. I don't know. Something about Iona just makes me laugh, so maybe I'm a terrible person, but it's my list, so I can say whatever I want. Next up, we have Coalition Victory. I think this is the perfect example of how an 8-mana sorcery can just say you win the game, and it wouldn't even be that good. This one specifically says you only win the game if you control creatures of every color and lands of every basic land type. Now the reason this card is seen as way too good is because if you play a 5-color creature, that counts as a creature of every color. You don't actually need 5 different creatures. And similarly, if you have like a Triome, that can count for 3 of the basic land types. So theoretically, you only need 2 lands. And this does seem really good if you have a 5-color commander, but the thing is most 5-color commanders don't actually work with this card. If we ignore Golos, then the top 10 most popular 5-color commanders are Kenrith, Sisay, Ur-Dragon, Morophon, Najeela, Joda, the First Sliver, Sliver Overlord, Asika, and Ramos. And out of all 10 of those, Sliver Overlord, the First Sliver, and the Ur-Dragon are the only 3 that would actually work, because none of the other ones are actually 5-color creatures. I'm not sure that Sliver decks would run this card, and if you have the Ur-Dragon out, and you play an 8-mana sorcery, you deserve to win. Like, you already have the Ur-Dragon, how are you not already winning the game? So even if this card was legal, I don't know what deck it goes in. I think the best case scenario with this card is you put it in a Garth deck and you try to use Black Lotuses to play it, but that seems fine. If you lose to Garth Coalition Victory, then that's kind of your fault. Like, you should have killed the Garth, I don't know. And that's the other thing, is this card has huge blowout potential, because if you play this card and someone kills your 5-color creature in response, you get nothing. You just played an 8-mana sorcery that does nothing. And now, for possibly the most controversial hot take on this entire list, we have Scheherazade. I think this card should immediately be unbanned. Now this is the card that's famous for being banned in Vintage because it makes you play a sub-game of Magic, and whoever loses the sub-game loses half of their life in the real game. I'm pretty sure this card was only ever banned because it was dumb and not because it was good. The problem is it just makes games take way too long, and if you're playing in a tournament, you could pretty reasonably time out every single game just by playing as many Scheherazades as possible. But if this card deserves to be legal anywhere, I think it deserves to be legal in Commander. And yes, I don't think it would be great if people were making every game take like an extra hour by playing Scheherazade over and over. But there are already cards that do that, and they're not banned because they're bad. There are so many Chaos cards that do ridiculous things that just make the game take forever. And the interesting thing is Scheherazade is white, and there are almost no other white Chaos cards, so you probably aren't even going to see this in that many Chaos decks. This card could definitely be used irresponsibly to make games absolutely terrible, but it's also really funny and some people would really enjoy playing it, so I think it's fine. Let white have some fun. And that is it for every single banned card. And now I'm going to take a little bit of time at the end to talk about some cards that are currently legal that maybe could be banned. Now just for clarification, I'm not saying these cards should be banned. All I'm saying is if you forced me to pick a list of cards to ban, these are the ones that I would pick first. Personally, I think they're all fine, they can all be legal, none of them are a huge problem. But if I had to ban cards, these are the ones I would pick. First off is Time Twister. Mostly just because it's in the Power 9, and it's just weird that it's legal. I think it's by far the best wheel. Shuffling back your graveyard is actually really nice. It's kind of incidental graveyard hate for other people, and it can buy back some of your win cons. It's just really good, and I don't even think people would miss it that much because there are enough wheels that people should be fine without this one. Most people aren't even playing this one because it's like $1,000 or something. Next up is Doomsday. I am very confused as to how Gifts Ungiven is banned, but Doomsday is legal. Gifts Ungiven tutors for 4 cards, kind of, and Doomsday kind of tutors for 7 cards. That just doesn't really add up to me. Next up is Thassa's Oracle, by far the best win condition in any super competitive Commander deck. Like, I miss the days when people played Laboratory Maniac and it was actually a meme, and when someone pulled it off it was really funny. Thassa's Oracle just makes it too easy. Now, once again, I'm not saying it has to be banned, I think it's fine, but if I had to ban something, I would ban Thassa's Oracle so I could start playing my Labmans again. Next up is Stasis. I'm pretty sure Stasis has been rated the saltiest card on EDH Rec multiple times in a row. It's ridiculous. It's almost more unfun than it is powerful, even though it's ridiculously powerful. I don't think I really need to explain this one. No. Up next is Cyclonic Rift. I think Cyclonic Rift is what Prophet of Kruphix used to be. A card that's not necessarily super broken, but everyone plays it and it's really good, and those two things together just make it a little bit annoying. It's fine to play it, I have one in one of my decks, but I try not to play it as much as I can because I'm just kind of tired of it. But it does cost 7 to overload, so I don't think it's too good. And last up, we have Time Warp / Temporal Extortion / Capture of Jingzhou. These are all the same card, just 5 mana, sorcery, take an extra turn. And I think 5 mana for an extra turn is too good. And the bigger thing is that none of these extra turns exile themselves when you play them, so you can just get them back from your graveyard, and it's really easy to get infinite turns. And no, I don't think these cards are too good, but I am just really not a fan of extra turns and just kind of how easy they feel. And I feel like people don't truly appreciate how broken extra turns are, because extra turn is like its own ability, so people kind of judge how good an extra turn is based off of other extra turn cards. Let's pretend for a second that there was a 5 mana red sorcery that says you get to take an extra combat phase. Also, you get to untap all of your lands and draw a card, and you get an extra upkeep. That would be the best red card ever made. And that still wouldn't be as good as Time Warp. Extra turns are cantrips, and they're rituals, and they're also a bunch of other things, because you just get so many things when you get an extra turn. But I think the fact that all of that is just put into the phrase extra turn kind of hides how ridiculously good it is. So no, these don't need to be banned, and you're not bad if you play them. I've played them before too. But if I could ban something, I would highly consider these ones. Once again, if you think my opinions are garbage, then make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment so you can continue to make fun of me in your heart. It's trivia time. Our question from last week was, what does the incredibly forgettable commander Sir Alan do? The answer is, he has first strike, and whenever he attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This commander is so bad. No offense to the 20 people who apparently built this deck according to EDH Rec, but this is the most underwhelming legendary creature I've ever seen. But that's enough of that. Let's move on to today's question. Since this episode was all about the ban list, our trivia question today is about cards that used to be banned but then got unbanned. There are actually quite a few cards that used to be banned because of weird rules things and just different philosophies about the format. So, which of the following cards has never been banned in EDH? We have Crucible of Worlds, Serra Ascendant, Rift Sweeper, Beacon of Immortality, and Death Wish. Make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss the answer in the next video. Thanks for watching.